which is the week of May 11th through the 15th. And the assignments will be due on Monday the 18th. And any day now, my calendar will refresh. Wi-Fi's been just a little bit better than it was, but still not great. Okay. So first thing I'll talk about quickly here is the presentation part of the synthesis project. And obviously we're using the term presentation kind of loosely here since we will not have the option to present in class like normally would be required. So I kind of have some little suggestions here. Again, normally we'd be doing this on Google Slides or maybe PowerPoint or Prezi, some kind of visual presentation that doesn't involve cat's butts. But obviously for some of us right now, that may not be an option depending on what your technology is at home. And so I understand if you have to do something different, that's totally fine. So if you have Google Slides on your device at home or something else that you're comfortable using, you're more than welcome to still do that just like you normally would and create the slides that you would use if you were presenting in class. You might, and I don't want you to stress out too much about this. Remember, this is just a daily grade at this point. So I think it's good practice. We haven't really done any formal presentation things this semester. We did the ones over your books back in October, but it's been a while. So I think it's still a good skill to practice, but again, I don't want it to be a huge source of stress right now. So you might choose to, if you're using something that has a little speaker notes like Google Slides and like PowerPoint have, you might kind of mention just a little bit about what you would talk about because either way, I want you to keep in mind that the goal here, if we were doing this in class, would be for you to be the one presenting the information and the slides just to be supporting you. And so, as I think I have down here, I'm sure you've heard, especially if probably you've taken speech and things like that, there are all sorts of rules of thumb out there for how many words you should have on a slide and how much text should go on a slide. And I've seen different ones, different places, but either way, usually the idea is not too much because especially if you're already talking, people don't want to read a whole bunch off of the slides. So when you're deciding what to put on the slides, I want you to think about what visual information would be most helpful. So hopefully you've already sent me your essay. Sorry that I haven't finished grading those yet. But I don't need to read the whole thing again. This would be just a great place to show me, again, would you use photos to maybe add to the pathos? Would you use statistics? Do you have charts and graphs and things that would help with your logos? How would the visual information that you could provide in this kind of context help build your argument? And just focus on that. You don't need to retell the whole paper in slide format. And I've mentioned on here a couple options for what you might do if you don't have the ability to use something like Google Slides right now. So one of the examples I talked about is sort of that kind of science fair trifold board. I don't want anybody buying any of the expensive ones out there. That is completely unnecessary right now. We all have better things we could be spending our money on. But if you want to get just, a plain piece of poster board and fold that, and if you would rather lay it out that way, that's fine. You could go even simpler than that, though, and just take, do I have blank paper? I'm sure somewhere I have blank paper, but I'm not going to try and find it right now. But just on regular paper, just sketch out what your slides would look like. This, like I said, it's a daily grade. This doesn't have to be a fancy finished product. I know that's kind of the antithesis of what we expect when we think about AP, we think about the big projects and everything. But the world is a little different right now, and we can kind of roll with that and adjust. I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities senior year to do presentations. Maybe even in lit. I'm trying to think if we did presentation. Kind of. Did a poetry project this year, but I'll be changing things up next year. So who knows? We might add something in just so I know for sure you get that practice. We'll see. Anyway, so I don't want to spend too much time on here talking about the project because, like I said, I don't want this to be a big, huge deal. But if you have questions still, please let me know and we can talk through it. All right. Next thing is we have some more primary sources to go along with our Slaughterhouse 5 unit. The main one, as you can see from the title here, being a speech called Beyond Vietnam that Martin Luther King gave actually 1 year to the day before his death, where he talked about the Vietnam War and the various reasons why he was opposed to the Vietnam War. And it's on the long side. I think they have on the website here the audio that you can listen to of him actually giving the speech. And if you listen to it, it is, I think, just a little bit under an hour long, partly because he was a very slow, deliberate speaker who wanted to make sure everybody could hear and understand him. And so you probably, if you're just reading the text in your head, could go through it faster than the way he read it or delivered it to his audience. The choice is up to you how you would prefer to ingest that information. I would also say, again, because it is on the longer side and you have other things that you're doing this, this is probably a decent opportunity to practice some strategic skimming where you might read the first, say, 10 or 15 paragraphs pretty closely, and then see what sticks out and jumps out at you in the middle portion, and then focus again on the last maybe 5 to 10 paragraphs and see how he wraps things up. And then the second document is much shorter, but it's a letter he wrote. As you're probably aware, there were people who disagreed with Dr. King, and even some people who were supporters of his, in this case, did not necessarily agree with him, kind of, in their opinion, going out of his lane and talking about something that was maybe not directly associated with the cause he most was involved with, the civil rights issue. Now, he talks in the speech itself about why the Vietnam War was important on civil rights issues, because it did influence poor people and people of color more than wealthier people. But he also writes this letter kind of addressing people who criticized him for discussing the war and criticizing the war and why he talks about why, obviously, he thinks it is his job as a minister and as a civil rights leader to address it. So that's a much shorter document. So you can probably read that one in its entirety without too much trouble. And then I have questions here. I tried to make it pretty clear. I think the first 3 are specifically asking about the speech. And then the second 2 are asking about the letter. And so hopefully that's not super confusing to you. And, well, I'm definitely not going to say don't read the speech, but if you're answering one of the questions more about the letter, then you might, again, be even more strategic about how much of the speech you read in really great detail. And then make sure, again, that you respond to 2 of your classmates. And then, as I said, we're still in our Slaughterhouse 5 unit, so I have some questions about our next chunk of chapters 6 through 8 in the novel. And let me see if any of these need a little bit of explanation. This first one is very similar or somewhat similar to a question I asked last week, so I'll justify. We kind of see some different groups of German soldiers. So the last question was dealing with when, I think it was last week, when Roland, Weary, and Billy were first captured by the Germans. And this next question is asking about the group of, I believe it's 8 German soldiers who were guarding the American POWs that were brought to Dresden. And so this is a group that we meet in chapter 6 of the novel. So kind of similar question. And your answer may not be necessarily a whole lot different than if you answer that one before, in which case maybe choose a different one. You only have to answer one of these bullet points after all. But anyway, so just to be clear who it's asking about, these are the soldiers in Dresden, the group of, I think, 8. Okay, let's see. And I think there were only 4 in that first chapter 3. Okay, let's see. That's a quote. I think it's relatively self-explanatory. I don't know why that punctuation or that gap is there, but I'll try and fix that. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think these are, for the most part, pretty straightforward. Hopefully you're getting a good feel for the novel at this point. And then similar to last week, the last question is just giving you an option to discuss how those primary source documents affect, if they affect, how you understand Vonnegut's rhetorical situation. And again, as I'm sure you're aware from your history class, the Vietnam War was not a popular and completely accepted war as World War II. And if we were in class together, we'd watch some of the videos from, like, the newsreels and things from World War II, where the nation seemed much more unified behind the war effort versus Vietnam, where there were, if you believe Richard Nixon, a silent majority that did support the war. But as I'm sure you're aware, there was also a very vocal group, whether they were, minority or not, they were very outspoken about the war and in their opposition to it. And as you've probably figured out by now, Kurt Vonnegut was part of that group who did not support the United States fighting in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. So that should wrap it up for this week. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't yet, make sure you do the demo test on the AP website, on the College Board website. You don't have to actually answer any questions, like as far as, write an actual essay or anything. It's just to make sure that your technology and your connection and everything are going to be in good shape for the day of the test. So you can get, if you're uploading pictures, for example, you can kind of get a feel for how long it's going to take you to upload those and make sure that you budget enough time. They're going to officially give you 5 minutes. But if you realize you're going to need more than that, that's something that's good to know sooner rather than later. But way more importantly, if there's any issues with your browser or anything like that, and being able to actually get to the test itself. So make sure you're doing that demo, and let me or Miss Wyndham know as soon as possible if you do come into any difficulties when you're doing that. I think that should do it for the week. And let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help. Have tutorials scheduled at the regular times. So that's Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon. But you're also welcome to call or email any other time that you have a question. All right, take care, stay safe, make good choices. I miss y'all.